Does Jesus look like, I can't believe it's not butter, Pantene Pro V Jesus? After this. Welcome back to the reassembling. How long has it been? It's been forever. Say hello.
It's been too long. You're going to have to just quit your job because this working this too many hours is just not right. Are we going to focus on this podcast or what?
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. For all of those out there, thanks for subscribing. Yeah, we've missed a couple weeks. I actually moved.
Weeks.
That's about a month, right? Yeah, about a month. A little over a month. It's been too long. We're back at it again. We have some stuff coming out. Thanks for being patient. Thanks for actually joining the team, even though we haven't had nothing new out. But, you know, I have a new location. I have more room now. It's so cool. We have more room. We're going to start pumping out some new heresies.
He's been busy moving, firing people from his work. I mean, he's just been a busy man.
It's what I do. But I want to be busy for the kingdom. That's the number one.
Yes.
So I wanted to address this. This has been this is something I've wanted to talk about for so long because a lot of people have this. How do you address it? You know, it's when we're looking at Christian ideas and certain people will just say it who aren't white, look at this and say, hey, white people have portrayed Jesus to be white, and what's the deal? Well, what does he look like? It's a lie. Well, for one part, yes, it is a lie, but I want to show you why it's not what you think it is from early Renaissance period, even early on.
Yeah.
And
I think it goes back to just real quick, making God in our own image.
Yes, exactly.
We want God to look like what we want God to look at, and we're not supposed to do that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, we can, in hindsight, look at it and say, hey, we know Jesus isn't white. What's with the lie? That's what we can say, looking at it from history now, looking back. But I think it's important to know the issue of the history behind Jesus being portrayed as white.
Yeah.
Because the intention may seem different than what the outcome was. And that's I've learned a lot.
Right.
So, and I think this is one of the top 5 arguments against Christianity in all of social media for the secular world.
Yeah.
You know, hey, look, Christians, they've taught this, and especially with antebellum slavery, they've oppressed people, and, you know, white supremacists have used this image as a superiority to say, hey, you know, you bow down to this white lord of ours. But that's not the intent of what we're going to start from probably 3rd century on till we get to.
Yeah, I don't think the intent per se was to have slavery from the beginning when this all began. But I think the intent was they're thinking of what they want Jesus to look like. I think that's from the very beginning. Well, we think he looks like this because it fits real good with our doctrine and our theology, you know.
And I think nobody on YouTube or TikTok who has this argument is an art historian. So when they're talking about art, say this picture, the Israelites do all the time. They created an image after Caesar Borgia. This is a 16th, 17th century painting of the Pope's Caesar Borgia. That was his name. But that's not where white Jesus came from. It didn't start in the 17th century. We have it much earlier.
And this is why we say this every time we record. Why do we believe what we believe? Not just things in the Bible, but things like this. Why do we believe that Jesus is a white man with long hair and he looks like a hippie? Basically, you know. I used to think the dude on the zigzag rolling papers looked like Jesus. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, and I know on the western side of the world, it's hard to get that image out of your head. You have Jesus having a long hair, either no beard or a beard, blue eyes, and he's in the Middle East talking to a bunch of dark-skinned people.
With the British accent.
With the British accent. Exactly. They've portrayed movies for many, many decades. But, you know, I think a lot of this can be cleared up, but only for those who really care to study the actual subject. It's not for people who are looking for a bias. And when we talk about, you know, looking at things in history, we leave them as they were with the intended audience. We do this with scripture as well. So if we look at someone in the medieval church and we say, hey, we're going to start the Reformation. It's not how it happened. It's just something that progressed out of it. And then Martin Luther had no idea what the Reformation was. I'm going to start the Reformation, you know. what a
Right,
noble
right.
cause. He was just questioning things about the Catholic Church. There's some Catholic ideas. He never left till the day he died. But
Yeah, you were saying that before.
what they see is parallelism. And what that is they see two things similar. So therefore they came from the same thing. And you see the, I forgot what it's called, the Egyptian looking cross thing. I think it's called the Ankh. And then they have the Christian cross. See, it looks similar to the cross. Therefore it's stole from it. So
it must be pagan.
But they have nothing to do with each other.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
It does.
Pictures of Jesus historically have served many purposes, from symbolically presenting his power to depicting his actual likeness. But representation matters, and viewers need to understand the complicated history of the images of Christ they consume. Yeah. Before we start, we need to clarify primary sources, because we're getting some subscribers. We're getting people that comment. We're kind of getting some more traction going on TikTok and other apps. So when we ask for primary sources, me and you we're engaging with people that don't have similar views. When we ask for primary sources, what we both mean is that primary sources are raw materials of history that include items such as diaries, speeches, manuscripts, letters, interviews, news, film footage, official records, autobiographies, etc. These are firsthand sources, or the closest we can get to the actual event. So anything, if anything in history, you want to study anything in history, the closest you can get to that actual event is known as a primary source.
Second, and you can trust it to be a little more accurate.
You're gonna have
sources.
You're gonna have to trust it, because by any rational means, that's the closest you can get to that event.
Right.
Not necessarily making it true. If we can find a teaching from the Gnostics as close as the Gnostic, doesn't make that teaching true. It's just something they believed, and it's an artifact closely resembling their community, so forth.
We're
like that.
Basically just looking at history as it happened. We're not putting any bias in there. We're just,
And it's hard not to.
Yeah.
For all the cults, that we engage on a regular basis, that's what we mean when we're talking about a primary source.
Yeah.
Not what we think someone on YouTube said about a certain book that he read about the Illuminati. That's not a primary source, right? Well, I read so-and-so. It's Global Witness is notorious for that. Well, the obelisks, and then we have the Georgia Guidestones. This is all the same.
Thank God those Georgia Guidestones were struck down. I believe God did that.
I never cared about those things. But so let's start from the beginning, so we have some context. In scripture, we do not see any apostles depict any physical characteristics of Jesus. We just simply don't. They were very familiar with the Yahweh of the Old Testament. I've talked to why some people say they went into the synagogues. They did this. Yes, they have a Jewish background. Most of the pagan world saw these new Christians as arguing amongst the Jews in their religion. It didn't seem any different to the pagans.
Yeah.
So of course they would have an understanding of Christ. His followers, not Judas Iscariot, people who didn't really follow him, but they saw him as the revelation of Yahweh being manifested as Christ. So they understood the Old Testament, not to have a graven image, second commandment, right?
Right.
And that's understandable in the first century of the primitive church. Then we would have the Christian persecution after that. So from the first century all the way to the beginning of the fourth century, images of Christ, not even that important to the early church, not at all. And that's just
and if we look at the Old Testament, Isaiah says he has no form or comeliness that would be drawn to him. In other words, he wasn't this great looking man. And I think we forget about that too when we see these pictures where, like you said, he has the long flowing hair, the blue eyes. That doesn't even line up with Isaiah.
It doesn't. Yeah. And most scholars that are believing scholars say he looked like the people of his day. Nothing about him stood out in any way, shape, or form. But early evidence of Christian symbolism, before we even have any depictions of what an image of a human Christ, we have early Christian symbolism. So early Christians within the Roman Empire held secret underground meetings, as well as buried their dead underground in what is known as catacombs. So they were hiding from Roman persecution in the first couple centuries. Yeah. That's even in the Book of Romans and in the New Testament. Right. The earlier Christians were forbidden to have engraven images, but the earliest decor was scratched graffiti within the stone walls, which was the fish. It was the fish symbol, which was the Greek symbol for Christ, and the anchor. So it was a fish. I'm going to put these images up while we're talking. The fish with an anchor as a hidden symbol of the cross, because the cross was for criminals. So
can I just ask a question? I don't
Mhm.
mean to get you off your train of thought, but I never quite understood how the fish represented Jesus. Is it because
the fish story parable?
they're talking about that, or
Mhm.
become fishers of men, or do you
I
know
think-
what I'm saying?
Well, I think in Jesus, one of the many miracles that he
Was the feeding of
was the feeding of the 5,000. Yeah, I think that was the biggest.
I think Jesus should be represented as a steak,
As a
not
steak,
a fish, not a fish.
like a beef steak,
yes,
a T-bone steak.
I'm just saying it.
I love T-bone steak, succulent.
Oh, me too.
And okay, sorry about that, folks. We had to switch platforms, but anyway, we're talking about the fish and the anchor. We're talking about why the fish, you say?
Yeah.
The first figurines of Jesus date from about 320 AD in the style of the ancient world. Curly hair, no beard, an astonished shepherd boy. When Christianity grew rich and powerful, due to who? Due to who? That's my question.
Due to
When did Christianity start to grow rich and powerful?
Constantine. Confucius?
Bingo. The
Constantinople.
bewildered shepherd boy. You're right. Bewildered young shepherd boy would become inappropriate. So as that image of him being humble, it just kind of was not the deal. Once Christianity grew rich and powerful within the Roman Empire, it was seen as inappropriate. Now remember that when Constantine abandoned Rome for military and political reasons, he moved his court to Asia Minor, or modern day Istanbul, which is in Turkey, and he built Constantinople. So Rome was falling, and Rome was falling, and the freestanding statues would basically disappear from their influence on the ancient world. So we have these the Roman deities. They weren't very creative with any religion or nothing. They basically copied the Greeks. But these images of the human body and of being powerful and perfect physiques and all this beginning to fade because of Christianity. So it was more about spirit, less flesh. So remember that Christianity was on the Christianity is on the rise. For more than 1,000 years, the grace and beauty of the human body was seen as decadence. So decadence, the decaying, or they're on a moral decline. The pagan gods no longer offer protection because the spirit was replacing the flesh. In the East, the domed replica became the architecture of the Byzantine Church. In the highest part of the church, a new image of Christ was placed. I'm going to put that image up. Underneath the ceiling of the dome, like the Emperor Constantine who ruled by decree, Jesus has the book of judgment in his hand. The other hand offers a blessing. So if you see him in Eastern Church, it's Jesus. He's doing something like this, and he has a book in one hand and a blessing in the other. That's what that's representing. That Christ as judge, that Christ image, which only had but a small variation, kind of echoed throughout the land of the Mediterranean. So Egypt, Italy, Greece, and even Russia. So in my opinion, around this time, the images of Christ look more like a mixture of Middle Eastern, Syrian, somewhat Eurocentric, but not really. It's a much different than just a plain white guy, So that's kind of the image I'm seeing in the Eastern Church, at the time. But even to this day, that image is the image still used in the Eastern Orthodox Church. Why? Tradition. That's what tradition does.
Yes.
In the West, Christ crucified becomes the more prevalent theme. Also in the East, small pictures known as icons were being produced usually by monks. These were paintings on wood protected by a wax coating. This art is actually a civil war within the East because fall to their knees and kiss the icons, carry them in procession, smoking with incense and lit by candles. So they still do this in the Catholic Church, where they're bringing these images to the streets of Mexico, South America, bringing these images through procession. But you have Mariam images, saints.
What do you mean by Mary?
Going on in the Eastern Church, from the West, right?
Is that what Miriam means?
Mariology, yes. Mariology is
Mariology.
yeah,
I never
Miriam.
heard.
Yeah, you
Oh,
have Mary.
okay.
Mariology is actually the worship of Mary. So that's what the
Oh,
Western Church
I
does.
never heard of that. That's
But
interesting.
Mariology, uh-huh.
Yeah.
So the East and the West split due to the fact of Easter, right?
Yeah.
And controversy. But even with the West, there's still a fracture within the rest and actual civil war because of these icons. That's the whole idea behind it. So the incense lit, the smoke incense lit by candles. So that's, I mean, there's another. We have smoke, we have incense. These images are becoming darkened because of the smoke and the incense. And there's a myth going on the internet that's this is the originally supposed to be what they look like, but they're really supposed to be this ethnicity, but that's not the whole idea going on behind these icons. There's incense, there's smoke.
Wow.
These things are going to be turning dark because of the smoke and incense. And the reason why they're still like that to this day, like you look at the Black Madonna, these are icons. They're better preserved by historians by not cleaning and repainting them. So I mean, it's
Can
a
I
conspiracy.
ask?
They don't want to restore. You're gonna.
Ouch. Oh, I was just going to ask, what do you mean they're going to be turning dark, literally or figuratively?
No, the idea is that the original images were dark and that it was been whitewashed over a conspiracy. But in reality, in historical reality, is that through procession of the incense and burning of candles and being these statues being around flames, the smoke, the fire would turn these images darker. And
so
art
they literally
historians
were
try to
darkened.
preserve
Okay.
these. They literally became darkened through fire,
Okay.
incense,
I
all that
wasn't
stuff.
sure if you meant like a dark presence or something. Okay.
No, for art historian to refurbish them, to preserve them, they would be ruining the art by repainting them.
Gotcha.
So they look like dark images.
Okay.
So
I'm sorry.
but that's not the whole idea. It's that ethnicity is not an issue or even a consideration in the 4th century. The way we see in the Western world.
Yeah.
So that has nothing to do with that time of era in history. Civil War. So here's the Civil War. Because of the veneration of these icons, these venerations horrified others. They would say only God is to be venerated, not representations of him, even of Christ or Mary or saints, any of them. So you can notice even within the Byzantine Empire, in the early century, we still had some discernment in saying that's an idol, that's an image. Because a lot of Reformed Christians, even Calvinists, they do this and look back in history and say, see, they're a bunch of heretical Catholics until we get to John MacArthur or whatever they want to say, But yeah, you still have discernment within the early church saying we're not to venerate these idols.
Yeah. Huh.
The East continues to schism. Those who are opposed to icons said the reason for their trouble to the worship of graven images and the only way to be saved was to destroy icons, which is heretical.
Yeah.
I mean, nowhere in the Bible does it say you're going to be saved by destroying these icons, but you can see their intention.
Yeah.
Destroying these icons, right?
Right. Yeah.
Those who destroyed the icons, they were known as iconoclasts. You ever heard of iconoclasm?
I've heard of iconomy. Okay.
Icona who?
Me.
Byzantine iconoclasm. Byzantine iconoclasm was started by a ban on religious images promulgated by the Byzantine Emperor Leo III. It was accompanied by widespread destruction of religious images and persecution of supporters of the veneration of images. But the papacy remained firmly in support of use of religious images, and guess what? They still do to this day.
Hello.
Pay attention out there. Got to pay attention. This is important. Now I know I didn't give you dates for any of that stuff so far where we're at, but now just imagine we're in the 9th and 10th century, which is the 800s and 900s. So this is a little less than a century before the Crusades, right? The Roman legions never crossed the Irish Sea. So this is going to reshape the image of Jesus within Ireland, his closest place to the Roman province. These images are inventions of the Irish monks and what Christ in flesh might have looked like in the no concern to them. So there's no concern of what Jesus even actually looks like. It's about preserving Their idea was to preserve written civilization by copying and illuminating great books. So 700 plus years after the crucifixion, the Christ image became an ornament. So it's a pattern without pain in Christianity of the Middle Ages. On an island of West Scotland named Iona, a group of monks
Iona.
began copying the Bible into what is called the Book of Kells. If you look it up, it's called the Book of Kells. Kells.
I have a book of
But this is interesting.
Kells.
Book of Kills. But this is interesting because the images at this point, the images to depict Christ are actually made up of the letters of his name. So the X and the P in Greek, which stand for Chi and Rho, the I and the Rho actually become patterned from the monks. They kind of go mad with design. They're coming up with these intricate designs. So it's overlap kind of stuff. The Rho, the letter of Rho in Christ actually becomes the human figure. So it's not anatomically correct. It's not an ethnicity of any kind of man. It's the design within the Rho of the Greek lettering, which I think is fascinating. So here's a 9th century Jesus on the back of a jewel bedecked Bible. There are red rubies that stood for his blood, and Christ is seen here surrounded by 4 pearls. He is alive, standing tall, open-eyed, feeling no pain, triumphant over death. The hue of each jewel each had a meaning: white for purity and joy, blue the color of heaven, truth, gold divine intelligence. So let's talk about stained glass. There's a very importance of stained glass within the old church. They would tell the story of Jesus, right?
Okay.
For the most part. But in the beginning, do you know who the first Holy Roman Emperor was? Just out of curiosity.
I'm gonna see Maximus Anonymous.
Anonymous. Max Anonymous. I like that. Anonymous. That's
I don't know.
But it's not too important for people to remember. But the very first Holy Roman Emperor was Charlemagne. If you ever heard of Charlemagne, and his allegiance with the military and his allegiance with the military and Christianity echoed that of ancient Rome under who? So he's following after. If you think ancient Roman Christianity, we're Constantine.
Yeah.
So this is where you get into the point where we have the government and the church being synonymous with one another,
which is never good.
This is the theme. Another question. So this would be the theme in the next century. What campaign? It's a military campaign. Think holy military campaign.
Yeah. Do what we say or we'll slaughter you.
The Crusades.
What a mess.
It's gotta pave the way for the Crusades. End of the 11th century to the end of the 15th century, where the Crusades is going on. So in the Middle Ages, the story was second. The idea of stained glass was that the only thing that mattered was the light illuminating from the heavens and flooding the house of God. I mean, I always think about the imagery of the medieval church. I bet it was pretty cool looking because they're very primitive in their.
Right.
Yeah, very interesting.
Even the architecture of the churches was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. The rich churches could afford to put up elaborate stained glasses. So there's the churches out in West. The poor churches put the image of Jesus on their walls with the painting technique called fresco. Which is fresh wet paint mixed. Yes, it's fresh wet paint mixed in with fresh wet plaster. But before any artist could paint on the wall, they drew out what was called a synopia. So basically, it's a rough draft that's waiting on approval from church authority. But some images were rejected because they would differentiate from the standard patterns of subservient and humble portrayals of Christ and Mary, saints, etc. So remember, artistic creativity was deemed blasphemous in the Middle Ages. So if you want to be anatomically correct and paint a correct Christ within his lineage, his tribe, his place
They
in an
didn't. They
area
didn't
of the
like
world,
that, huh?
it's deemed as it's deemed as
How?
blasphemous.
That doesn't make sense to me, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying. When we look back into history,
Yeah.
it's easy to say, "Hey, we all were tripping." We get that, but we're putting them in the context of where they lived. This is
Right.
all they knew.
Yeah.
There would be wars going on for months and months and months and months, and they wouldn't hear about it till 4 months later. There's a war going on. We get our information instantaneously, so totally
Yeah.
different world,
Oh
totally
yeah.
different. They were so connected to their mortality that they could die any minute. The average woman would have about 10 children just to see if that one child would live adulthood.
Oh dear Jesus.
You know what I mean? Yeah, it's a very seems like a very scary and dark place in medieval Europe. I
It
bet it was,
was.
but
Just
that's
having 10
all they
kids
knew.
was. How the heck you have 10 kids? Okay, I'm sorry. That's just wow.
Lorenzo, artist Lorenzo Gueverte, the goldsmith from Florence, Italy, portrayed what Michelangelo described. He's described of Guiverte's scenes as the doors of paradise crucifixion. So this
Mm.
guy basically worked on doors, three sets of doors for over 50 years, and they're very, very elaborate doors, and they have designs on them. He even put his image. What's crazy around this time in Middle Ages to Renaissance, we have the artist actually putting the image of themselves in paintings of Christ, paintings within biblical descriptions. Michelangelo
Mm.
did it.
Yeah.
Even Van Gogh did it. They all did.
Yeah.
It's kind of a statement.
Well, and
So,
real quick, even when you
mhm,
look at the elaborate production that Solomon did with the temple, it's interesting because he hired the best people that worked with gold, with those that worked with certain woods, And I remember reading all that,
mhm,
thinking, wow, there's this great, elaborate temple that Solomon built for the Lord. And it reminded me of, we're called the temple of the Lord in the New Testament, right? And it's like, to me, it's like every detail of your life and what's made you who you are, God's in those details. And that's what I find fascinating. The Old Testament temple was an elaborate building, but now we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. So to me, it's interesting. And I always looked at that as God takes great care in details, not so much the outward
mhm,
things, but the inward things, So I
mhm.
just found that really interesting.
Yeah, it's a spirit and flesh war. A lot of people don't understand the things of the spirit, and I think throughout church history is a very good example of how we outwardly present holiness and righteousness when it's the
Yeah,
spirit that convicts us within.
right,
So
right.
it took
But
them
I
years of
think
years
one last
to work these out.
yeah, and one last thing. I'm sorry, Jess. I don't mean to get you off track, but I think it's a beautiful thing when someone has a desire to make something beautiful God for God. You know, so I'm not saying that an elaborate church building is sinful or whatever. Someone might have gone. You know what? I feel I want to
Hmm.
just give something to God that's beautiful. But then, like you said, that becomes the focal point. This building now is the focal point, so it's like we can get things mixed up, even like this. What does
Hmm.
Jesus look like, so we're back on focusing on the outward,
Yeah,
so
isn't
sorry,
that
I was
crazy?
just thinking that.
So no, you're fine. Lorenzo Guiverti, he basically from that point, the art style with what the church is going to use as vindicate venerations of Christ is going to change drastically because of Guiverti. So
Oh.
it's more about perspective and dimension. We
Mhm.
have the frescoes, we have the weird Byzantine Christ, that we now getting more dimension and
Yeah.
perspective. Around this time, around this time, and this is Desiderius Erasmus's time. He was known as a humanist, and people think humanist. They're humanist, but it's not. It was a very Christian movement back then. It was ad
Yeah, back
fontes
then.
to the source, to the primary source, and this is where the Reformation is basically being developed. As we're looking at the Hebrew, we're looking at the exegeting of Scripture and realizing that the church is, kind of teaching outside of scripture, basically, that outside of the church, there is no salvation, stuff like that. But the
Right.
humanist movement was it found a new way to portray Jesus using depth to depict three-dimension space within a two-dimension surface. So I'm gonna put the image of that up.
Mm.
Also, Leonardo da Vinci, he transferred sketches from a German military engineer who drew anatomically correct people and used it in his world famous. What is Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting called?
Are you talking about date? No, that was a statue. Huh? Are you talking about the one where God's reaching his hand towards the man? Their fingers touch.
I think that's Michelangelo. Yeah, that's Michelangelo. It was the Last Supper painting.
I always get the turtles mixed up.
Hard to find. I know. So if you've ever looked at, so here's the concept behind the Last Supper. If you ever look at the original painting, if you ever look at the painting, in its context, what they're trying to depict is Jesus saying, "One of you will betray me," and that's why they all look like that at the table. That's the whole concept behind the whole painting. Jesus is speaking to the 12 disciples. One of you will betray me. So if you look at the disciple face, point this way, and I like when people say, "No, Jesus is talking about we're going to split the bill half and half." So they're all pointing to this guy's going to pay, this guy's going to pay.
Yeah, and they're all pulling out their pockets and they're empty, like.
I ain't got none. So another one of Da Vinci's paintings, Jesus holding the lamb, Mary holding Jesus. In the background, Saint Anne, Mary's mother, the Saint Anne that Martin Luther prayed to before converting to a monk.
I never heard of her. Saint Anne of
Saint
Green
Anne,
Gables.
she was a. It comes from the Evangelium de Nativitate, which is Latin for the Gospel of the Nativity of Mary. It's basically a 3rd century non-biblical source found in the Gospel of James. It's a pseudepigraphal book, but at the time, that's what Martin Luther was under the influence of. Pseudepigraphal. So Saint Anne, Martin Luther was Saint Anne in the woods with the forest when they had that storm.
No.
You heard the story of his conversion?
In the woods.
You ever heard the story of Martin Luther's conversion? Yeah, well, it was a storm.
No, actually, I haven't.
He bows down. Yeah, he's gonna have a storm. He thinks he's gonna die that day. He bows down and says, "Saint Anne, if you save my life, I will become a monk." That's how he became a monk. Saint Anne saved him. So that's where he's at. That's where he's at.
He's not converted.
He's a heretic. A half century later, the sculpture said of this piece. Think of the mind state of these artists at this time. The sculptor said of this piece, the essence of the work was already in the stone. Take away all the stone, has nothing to do with it. Trapped inside marble is the beata waiting to be set free. End quote.
What's a beata?
That's how artists saw. It's a form of art. The beata. It's a sculpture. Michelangelo. Here's Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel. As a young man, Michelangelo painted the ceiling of scenes from Genesis. So for over 4 years, he painted on his back. His skin was diseased by the plaster. He actually fell from the scaffolding one time.
I hate when that happens.
That's funny.
It
30
is
years
beautiful.
later. Oh yeah, I know. And that long to do it. So he's a very young man. 30 years later, Michelangelo, he accepted a commission to paint on the back wall of the chapel. And this is the largest fresco of the century called The Last Judgment. Have you ever seen that? I'll put that picture up. It's very, very fascinating. Originally, Christ was painted in the nude. He was later covered up with a cloth by later generations. One arm sends figures to heaven while the other hand sends the damned to hell. And most of the artists at this time, they would put, the upper. But see here, this is a big example. People in the 21st century can see, you can connect these two. You have the Baphomet. You know how the Baphomet goes high and low?
Yeah.
Oh, did you see you see Michelangelo's Last Judgment? Christ is doing the same thing. Therefore, do you see how I connect the
He's evil.
two and they don't even belong to one another? Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean by parallelism.
Why
That's
were
just
they
because they
painting
do the
him
same thing. It's that.
naked? Like Jesus porn? That's
Well,
just
that's the
wrong.
form of art.
That's
No,
just wrong. I'm sorry.
that's the style of art.
Not in my
That's
book.
the style of art
Not
during the
my art
Renaissance.
book.
So,
Well, they're weird.
what's going on in North Italy? The vision of this Trinitarian Christ. So in this image, you have Father, Son, Holy Spirit all in one face, which is kind of weird. You have his face, three Christs in one face. So they're trying to depict a
Nice.
triune.
That
Yeah, it's
sounds
pretty
creepy as
freaky.
all get out. And this is art. Okay.
Yeah, and much of the controversy becomes centered on how to portray the look of Jesus. His name is Albrecht. Albrecht Dürer painted himself as Christ. He's a German
What?
painter from the Renaissance. He believed that every believer was to be an imitator of Christ. So, in his eyes and in his congregation's eyes, this was considered homage, not blasphemy. That's how he interpreted it.
What a weirdo.
So, for most of church history up until the Reformation, all images and portrayals of Jesus were influenced solely by the rich and the clergy. This is where it gets interesting. Yes. So that was until woodcut. The woodcut came out shortly after the. Do you know what changed and revolutionized?
What changed and revolutionized what you cut out?
Literature.
Insanity is all I can come up with. People were insane.
Insanity.
Right?
Well, no, it was the Gutenberg
No.
press.
Oh, well, duh
No,
to
yeah,
me.
Gutenberg,
Steve
the
Gutenberg.
Gutenberg press. It started. Steve Gutenberg. His name was Steve. Yeah, the Gutenberg press revolutionized literature.
Right.
Steve. His name was Steve. Bob. Some weird name like that. Stephen Bob's Gutenberg press. Come on down to Stephen Bob's Gutenberg press. Get y'all nice and press like. So now, Steve. Where'd you get that name, Steve?
He's an actor. Steve Gutenberg.
Steve Gutenberg. Okay. All right.
Sorry.
Steve Gutenberg. Does that make sense? The Gutenberg?
No.
That's funny. But we have,
Okay.
yes, we have people copying. I think we're stressed out with trying to get these meetings to work.
Oh, okay.
Scuba Steve, dang you. All the. Need a minute. Steve Gutenberg. Yo, the Steve Gutenberg. The Steve Gutenberg press. Yeah. That's quality item. The Steve Gutenberg press. Funny.
I'm sorry. Whew, okay. I guess I need that laugh.
I needed that one, huh?
Go back to your serious look at this.
I was trying to ask you what made literature revolutionary, and you're like, and I said the Gutenberg. You said Steve Gutenberg.
Okay. Coming down.
So that the woodcut, okay. Simple woodcuts are printed and duplicated and sold among the poor and the illiterate. Because remember now, images and literature is only possessed by the rich, the clergy.
Why are you gonna give
now,
literature
for the first time,
to
the
the
images
illiterate?
of Jesus.
Are you like, here, read this? They can't read.
Well, what a woodcut is actually.
Oh.
John, give him. No.
Sorry. Here, read this. He can't read.
They're giving literature to the literate. So it's these images that were carved.
It's illiterature.
The literature. They're giving these these images that are carved on wood, right? And then they're
Okay.
basically thin, put on the Gutenberg press, and they can be printed and duplicated. So now we have these images that are
Okay.
dirt cheap, can get enter into homes, and people have images of Christ inside their home. So this is around
Oh,
the
gotcha.
time of religious war, because we know the Gutenberg press is in Germany.
Let's
There's
just
a
stop
religious
saying
war going
that.
on in Germany between Catholics and Protestants.
Let's
What?
just stop saying Gutenberg because I can't stop thinking of Three Men and a Baby. Steve Gutenberg
Steve
was in that.
Gutenberg. Gutenberg. And so around this
Yeah, so the
time,
war's
religious
going
war
on. Yeah.
eh, in between Germany and Catholics and Protestants. So
Yeah.
it's basically the concept is whoever ruled the state chose its religion, and the woodcuts were used
Gosh.
by both Catholics and Protestants.
Yeah.
Protestants would contrast poverty of Christ on a mule with the richness of the Pope on a fine horse. So that's basically how we have imagery going in poor servant Christ and his
Yeah.
humbleness compared to the Pope. Now we're saying, hey, look at this Pope on his horse. On the
Yeah.
Catholic side, El Greco's The Allegory of the Holy League begins in heaven. The light of Christ fall on the black robed figure of King Philip II of Spain, blessed by the Pope. Even in the background of this image, it's kind of funny. You see the uh, behind the king, it's a mouth of hell swallowing the Protestants, which is kind of an interesting
What?
imagery
Oh
against
my
how the Catholics
gosh.
saw the Protestants. Yeah.
Oh, can I just ask a question?
So
So the debate
yeah,
kind of was like, we don't see Jesus as a subservient person. We see him as a great king, or is that what the issue was?
I think it depends on where you're at within um, within
I
Europe.
mean,
It
back
depends on if you're
then.
in the east or the west.
Oh,
It's
okay.
more at this point in time. I think we're more looking at Pope. We're looking at Mary. We're looking at very intricate designs of art. It's all about expensive art.
Oh,
Who's
okay.
a well-known artist? How can they depict the best that the church purchased? These glorious images, regardless of
Yeah,
anything biblical. I think, and nothing to do with
but
anything biblical. But
yeah.
Protestants, yeah,
So the Catholic Church
go
is
ahead.
basically trying to put the Pope in this, highly exalted position in the art. Is that what you're saying?
Hmm.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
did.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, they did I
Interesting.
think they did for a while too. Yeah,
Yeah,
they were
that's
doing that for a
interesting.
while.
Yeah.
In European art has new black faces, but the most common is that of this photo of one of the three kings came to adore the newborn. We know until the age of colonialism, Jesus and Mary were always white within the European construct.
Yeah.
By the time it came to races, mother and child changed color. So not only mother and child, often Jesus became black. When missionaries sent back art forms colonized art that was from colonized countries, the church authorities were obviously shocked to see certain imagery because they've had this tradition of what the art was going to look like, right?
Right. So
So
they
we have
blackface
Christian.
Jesus,
What I think is a beautiful
basically.
thing, though. I think what's a beautiful thing, we have Christianity going to another nation. That nation is going to depict them as themselves as well.
Right.
Um, the Middle
Yeah.
East, in Europe, now we see in Africa, even in Asia. Here's
Yeah.
one from the image of Christ's blood and suffering were found offensive, according to the some in Asia when they had the missionaries come there. In the earlier Chinese portraits, mother and child were acceptable, but Jesus on the cross was kept quite small. The white, you can even see the white missionaries are dressed like mandarins.
An orange.
They're kind of like, I don't know what you call samurai, or they look Asian, but it makes sense in that culture, right?
Right. It's like
The
every culture
anti-West Chinese,
sees Jesus differently.
right? The anti-West Chinese they resisted the missionaries because Lord in Chinese dialect sounds like the word pig, and that's how Christ is
Oh,
portrayed in Asian art as
oh
a
my
pig on a
gosh.
cross. If the West can paint canvas, then paint him on silk.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
But that's very interesting.
interesting.
Joseph,
Yeah.
Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. The
Mm-hmm.
artist, I'm putting all these images up. Joseph marrying
Yeah.
Jesus. The artist may have been Asian. The
Yeah.
artist may have been Asian, but he knew the symbols of Christianity. In this portrait, the boy carries a beam. It's an omen to the cross he will carry as a man. But you can see they all looked Asian. But you can see the symbolism of
Wow.
Christianity within it.
Yeah.
So, as Europeans colonized increasingly farther flung lands, they brought a European Jesus with them. Jesuit missionaries established painting schools that taught new converts Christianity in a European mode. So, if it weren't for the Jesuits, I don't think the European white Jesus would have been predominant in Western civilization as much, in my opinion.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? If you know anything about the Jesuits.
I know nothing of the Jesuits.
Jesuits?
Jesuits.
Okay. So, Steve Gutenberg, in America.
Stop it right now.
In America, the Protestants abandoned the Catholic cathedrals of Europe. Inside and out would be simplicity and literalness so that no image would stand between the believer and God. Thanks, Reformation. When settlers moved west, they faced not only the empty wilderness but also old, forceful religions. To the Native Americans, eternity spoke to them through the many spirits of the land, the rivers, the seas, the seasons, and the animals. So for Christians, so many gods and so much animal worship was pagan. You have two spiritualities colliding, and I think this is mind blowing because all this is all from a small group of Jews in Jerusalem in the first century on the other side of the world. So now they're literally making contact with the Native American ideology. I think that's a really two different worlds.
Yeah, I agree.
Native art and Christian art completely polar opposites. In Northwest Native art, a totem pole, they were carved to show which tribe the builder belonged to, the gods they worshipped, and the animals they held sacred. Here is the totem pole converted to Christianity. In medieval Europe symbol, the skull was a representative of the original sin of man, and it's also probably representing Golgotha. The totem pole became the crucifixion. The look of Jesus shows the pain of conversion. So here's a new religion gripping old beliefs. The
Right.
crucifixion is the central symbol of Western Christianity, the portrayal of a God who felt the same pain that humans feel. This is a very powerful image of Western art, and it's very, very, very fascinating image. It's you see him, he's on the totem pole. You can see it looks like a Native American with the mask on it, but he's on a crucifix, and you can see the pain in his face, and it's representing we're leaving this old tradition to convert to a Christian God. So it's a very powerful art.
Yeah.
Here's
Huh.
a Mexican Indian who wove a crucifixion in wicker.
Yeah.
Edouard Manet, the first impressionist, even though he was criticized for his portrayal in his The Dead Christ with Angels, said this: "My duty is to paint Jesus as at least once because it's considered one of the greatest symbols in art. Van Gogh even did one portrayal of Christ.
Is
Mark
his ear gone?
Chagall, yeah, he actually did one. Mark Chagall, 20th century, who was a Russian Jew, he actually did a stained glass crucifix for Rockefeller Chapel in New York City. Pablo Picasso did Christ being pierced. The Last Supper by Dali. Rembrandt, The Sleeping Savior. So these are all famous artists doing a depiction of the crucifixion. Oh,
Okay.
Yeah. In the art world, Jesus is a symbol that no great artist can avoid. During his lifetime, nobody made a record of what he looked like. Every look of Jesus has been created by man, and I agree with that.
Yeah.
The face of Jesus you see was invented in the imagination of famous artists and unknown artists from different places, different ages, and different cultures. He has been carved out of stone, marble, mosaic tile, oak wood, ivory, bronze, steel, etc. So the look of Jesus stems from the history of art. Haven't covered, but here's what we haven't covered in this video and what we addressed in the video. What we haven't covered is how white supremacy used these depictions of white Jesus. So I think that's
Yeah.
another topic for another episode. I just wanted to give people the history of the art, where it came from, the intentions
Right.
of the artists in their context. So I think that's very
Yeah.
important for people to know.
And that doesn't mean that any artist that made it as a white Jesus, their goal in mind was to say, hey, white people rule everything. But like you said, some people have used that specific image as Jesus is a white man to abuse, the black community, of course. But to say that if someone sees Jesus as white now, that's their main goal, we always want to stereotype everybody in today's world. You know what I mean? But like you said, to be accurate, we have to see that Jesus wasn't white. He wasn't black. He was of the Jewish, descent. So no one gives a real descriptive view of what Jesus looked like. You're not going to find that he was 6'2". You know what I mean? And I think there's wisdom in that, because I think that, again, we'll be focused on the outward appearance. Mankind, we're just focused on that. And then even God told Samuel that, man looks at the appearance, I look at the heart. But what I find interesting is how the portrayals of Christ in art, like you said, did change down through the ages. So when like going back to Rome, they saw Christians as really strange and superstitious, and they looked at them, just kind of like, what's up with these people. But during that time, Jesus was portrayed in art with no beard. He had no beard at that time. So I found that interesting, and short hair. And this and with the short hair all up through the 4th century, right? So then he's going to take another turn, and he's going to start looking like different gods. And there's one particular god called Dionysus, Dionysus. He was the god of winemaking. Now, maybe they used that image because we know, God, Jesus's first miracle was turning water into wine. So again, you see man going, oh, then he must look like this God over here because he's the God of winemaking.
Right.
So, right. But then at the end of the 4th century, he's now seen as a wise and powerful God in the artwork, right? Now he has a beard. Now he has a beard. And in the Greco-Roman world, images of Zeus were now Jesus is beginning to look like Zeus now, okay? And they're different art.
I think he's being ascribed. He's being ascribed to Zeus.
Yeah. And
I think Zeus is the image of Zeus that existed.
Yeah. And Zeus was called the father of the gods and the king of the gods. And Jesus, we know, is the King of Kingdom, Lord of Lords. So there's man again, always trying to put in their 2 cents of what we think things mean in Scripture, which is interesting, right? Yep. But now, Jesus is portrayed with the beard and the long robes. He's wearing a long robe now, okay? You have to hold it. Anyway, but what I found interesting, just...
I'm sorry.
You're fine.
It's just not.
Tuck it in your shirt. Just talk like that. But anyway, going back to the robes, I find it interesting that in Mark 12:38, Jesus says this: "Beware of the scribes who desire to walk in long robes and have salutations in the marketplaces." So it's like every depiction man wants to make a Jesus, there's always something that counters that. And here's another example. Jesus doesn't want to be pictured in these long robes. Why? Because the scribes had that desire to be praised by men in this elevated position. You know what I mean? Sing. You look like you're going to sing. This little light of mine. Okay.
I think this is a great show back, a great return show back. I mean, I couldn't think of anything more better than
your microphone breaking.
This is going to be great.
We needed that.
Sorry, go on.
Anyway, so I found that interesting about the robes thing, right? Now, I want to take a quick look. And this is I don't want to say it's a slam, but this is a rebuke to the Hebrew Israelites, the black Hebrew Israelites.
Yeah.
Okay. Revelation 1:14 through 15, we're very familiar with that. That talks about
Oh boy, there we go.
his hair being as white as wool, white as snow. So right there, that doesn't say the texture of his hair. We're specifically saying the color of his hair. So that refutes their whole nope.
They
Yeah,
wanted to say the hairs on his head are wool. That's what they're trying to make it say.
But it says right specifically, white like wool and white like snow. We're talking about a color. I don't know how you can get that wrong. But so that was my.
Well, yeah, it also says his hairs and his head, his hairs and his head and his hairs.
We're white, yeah. So now that doesn't even mean he's white. Yeah. It means he's glowing. Right. So just I wanted to throw that in there, right? So I had a question. That's a good one. Yeah. So in first century Judea, what did people look like? This is what they looked like. And we can see it even depicted on their coins. You would see a bearded Jew, but this bearded Jew on the coin was bowing before a Roman soldier. So, just the way they saw things and even how that's how life was back then. They were being oppressed by Rome. We know that, right? So the Jews on the coins were seen as being bearded, right? And the Romans saw the Jews as philosophers, right? And Jewish philosophers were depicted as having short hair, bearded, and they had darker skin. So, that's another portrayal of the Jewish people, right? So, yeah. So here's another thing. If you look at the oldest...
Can I say something? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
If you're looking at his ancestry, if anything, he's a descendant of Abraham. We know Abraham was a champion from Ur.
Right,
this isn't Iraq, so if anything, Jesus would closely be resembling the ethnicity of an ancient Iraqi, if anything.
Right, and I was just
historically correct, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the skeletal remains of Jews from way back when have been examined, and they're actually put in a database in Israel called the Israeli Human Osteological Database. So they actually looked at all these remains, and yes, what they're saying is the Jews from Christ's time will resemble Iraqi Jews. So they have that olive-colored skin.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Yeah. So anyway, and then this is what else they found out, more specifics on that, right? These Judean men were about 5'5", so they're not real tall. They had dark hair, dark skin, and dark eyes. Okay. So then you have to look at the displacement of the house of Israel, which we have a mixed race now. Okay, you've got the Babylonian captivity, the Jews when they dwelt in Egypt, and the collapse of the Persian Empire. So that's going to affect how they look as well, right? So even this guy was reading. He said even Mary, we don't know what she might have been mixed with. So in other words, we don't have, specifics. We can know some things, but like Mary, what did she look like? Well, we even see Mary kind of depicted as a white woman, I think, So anyway, now then we have to go look at Christ. Was he a Nazarene? And this is important, right? Because a Nazarene, in the Bible, in the Hebrew culture, we can see this in the Old Testament, that this is a man who takes a vow to prove their devotion to God. Remember, Samson took the vow he wouldn't cut his hair, right? And also, two things that were required of a Nazarene is they could not drink wine. We know that. And they have to stay away from dead things, specifically dead people. But you look at Christ, and he not only turned the water into wine, but he raised Lazarus from the dead. So some skeptics say maybe he was a Nazarene, maybe he wasn't. But to me, it's like I don't know. I always feel like God is always, just shattering our box of what we think, God is and what Jesus looked like, and you know what I mean? So does that make
Yeah,
sense?
exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, there were two types of Nazarites. One was they were entered their vow at their birth. In other words, their mother vowed then to God, as Hannah did with Samuel. Okay, and then of course we have Samson. We talked about that. So, but also, men and women could take a Nazarite vow, and what they would do was they would grow their hair long. And if anyone saw them, they'd know, oh, that person's in a vow before God at this time. So I found that interesting too. You know? So,
Yeah.
because back then the men's hair was normally short, which is interesting too. So I did find it interesting. So in other words, we don't have 100% proof proving that Jesus was a Nazarite. So I found that interesting, Okay. So, and then I was looking at the robes that. Quit fiddling. Stop it.
I'm listening. I'm sorry. This is driving me crazy. I'm listening though.
I know, but you're
I can listen.
distracting
I can
me.
do two things. I'm not trying to distract you.
Well, then stop it. Stop. It's your mother, Jesse. Put that down before I slap your.
I'm sorry. Keep going. Keep going.
Okay, so back to the robes that the scribes wanted to wear.
God.
I
Yeah.
found this interesting. Okay.
Uh-huh.
The robes that they
Yeah.
were wearing at that time were more like a military uniform, which I found interesting. Why would scribes want to wear a military uniform? They love this position of power. Yeah, I found that interesting, right?
Is that what it was?
And yeah, that's what it's saying. And then the word walk, when they're walking around the marketplaces, it meant strut. In other words, they're just, hey, I'm bad, I'm a scribe. You know what I mean? They're strutting around. I found that interesting, right? And basically, a scribe is anyone who used written records in their job, kind of like a secretary or a registrar. So it's not like they're this wise, important person, which I always thought. They're basically just recording crap, right? So anyway, so Christ used the word scribes specifically as someone who studied the Bible and wrote about its meanings. And today they would be more in the classification of academics. I found that interesting too, right? And then, that scripture in Mark that also talked about the desiring. They want these robes. Why? Because they want to be seen as someone, in an elevated position. Like, hey, we know it all, all they're doing is recording crap, but they know it all.
You can't say that's still going on to this day.
Oh, no, it's nothing like that. Yeah. So, and then
nothing's going on like that, no.
Jesus said they wanted to be greeted in the marketplaces. The marketplaces could be any place of assembly or public speaking place. So I found that interesting too, And they also desired the highest seats. They wanted to be in a place of prominence. We don't see a whole lot of humility going on in their desire, to wear the robes and be saluted and have the best seats. What is all that about? Interesting,
sense.
Right? Yeah. So anyway, that's what I discovered, and I found it interesting because it's almost like mankind does not want to see Christ as, when he walked the earth, as a humble human being. I mean, of course, he was, divine still, but Jesus came as that lowly servant to give us an example of how to live.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And it's interesting to me that most artists throughout history haven't really depicted Christ as that servant. And I just find that interesting. Now, of course, we know he is risen and he's King of Kingdom, Lord of Lords, But I just find it interesting that there's something within mankind where we don't like this whole thing about serving and humility and You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I just found that interesting.
I agree.
In what I found out in my studies. So,
Yeah, it's we all have made God in our own image. If it's not a
yeah.
depiction of what he looks like, it's how we want him to function in our lives and
Yes.
how we want to understand scripture, not just always image. You know, it's some things are worse than
Right.
just having him sit in your the way you think he should interact with your life and how you deal with sin. So
Yeah.
there's spiritual things that are more important, you know, other than back and forth of what he looked like. You know, I of course I would want to know exactly what he looked like, but I don't. We shouldn't harp on that. We know that he became a human being, and that he went
Right.
into eternity from where he came. That's the most
We
important
need
thing
to
that we need to know.
we need to focus on the things
Mhm.
that are most important, and it's even simple things like this. What did he look like that can cause division, that can trip people up? And to me, it's not rocket science. If he was born in Bethlehem and he
Right.
comes down from Judah, he's Jewish descent. So it's like,
Yes.
why do we even talk about this? I mean, to me, it's just common sense, you know.
If Jesus was Chinese, would you believe he was the Son of God? Yes. If he was black, would you believe he
Yeah,
was Son of God? Yes. If he was white, yes. It's regardless of what you think. I don't think that's important at all.
I don't
Did he
either.
raise from the dead? Regardless, you
Yes.
know, that's not a normal
Yeah.
thing that human beings of any race do. Don't raise
Right.
from the dead, and
Yeah.
that's he proved who he was by that very that whole claim right there transforms the whole entire known universe.
Yeah.
If the resurrection is true, then God's justice is true,
Right.
his mercy is true, his righteousness is true, and everything that Jesus believed of the Old Testament and future events that are to come is true. So I hang on that, what the resurrected Christ believed, the
Yes.
missionary Christ, the servient Christ, and the glorified Christ in Revelation. I believe all of that.
Amen.
So
Yeah.
it's just basically where are you
Yeah.
at with it, you know?
Yeah. Well, I
So and
think
that's
it's
good
just
for
I think it's just sad
no go
that
ahead.
the church gets caught up in these arguments that are so not important. This, I mean, this affects not just this, but then you have different denominations that say, well, in this particular denomination, men sit on this side and the women sit on that side, and then there's all this other stuff that goes
Mm-hmm.
with it. So if I think, can't we just get back to
Mm-hmm.
loving God, loving one another, humbly serving one another, consider others is more important than yourself. I mean, we get away from the simplicity that's in the message of what Jesus brought. The two greatest commandments: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, love your neighbors yourself. If we could just focus on those two things, we could turn this world upside down again.
Amen. I
Hmm.
believe so.
Yeah. So
But
that's all
I
I
thought we'd
got.
touch on that because that's a good, yeah,
Hmm.
it's a important subject to know the history of it, and
I
you know,
think
I
so.
don't think any
Yeah.
Reformed Christian or no, I mean, if you're believing that there's a white Jesus out there, then just stop. Like there is white Jesus. Obviously, he probably was more than
Or a
likely the
black
last thing he was
Jesus.
European. So yes,
Lately, it's
he
it's
was
it's
a Middle Eastern.
yeah. Lately, going back to the black Hebrews, Jesus was black, and God hates the white man. Baloney,
Oh yeah.
you know. So
Well, we're gonna touch
that,
on that later on.
hmm as we should. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
So we're going to end this one, and we do apologize for the delays and
technical
the lag in
issues.
this one. But we're gonna have to figure out what we're gonna do in the future, what platform we're gonna use to do our videos.
Yeah,
So
we're working on
um,
it. Yeah.
I'm glad to be back. We're gonna this gonna be coming up soon. There's another one coming out on the Seventh Day Adventist that probably put that one up Sunday. So do you have anything else?
to give our viewers a heads up. I think you and I believe one of our upcoming shows should be on the law. There's a new, well, it's not really new, but there's kind of a wave going on right now that you must be Torah observant to follow Christ. And I think that's something we really need to touch on.
Yes, I think that's vitally important.
Yeah.
So I think that'll be coming up in about three videos from now. Definitely.
Maybe sooner, I don't know. But, and also, of course, we have Raven's view on divorce. So
that's gonna be a good one. That's
yeah,
one.
and we also talked about just doing some short, funny ones because, you know, we all need to laugh now and then because, you know, a lot of things going on, and we just need to keep the joy of the Lord because, you know, I think I shared with you, Jess, this week's been hard on me. Emotionally, nothing's really going on in my life that's different, but I felt like this heaviness was coming on me, and I've been hearing from other Christians they felt the same thing, you know. So I had to kind of remind myself, oh yeah, put on the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness and resist the enemy, and he'll flee, you know. So that's why you and I think, you know, our sense of humor is important to us. It helps us through life. You know, so when we're being funny in our videos, we're not mocking God, we're not mocking the Bible, we're just being funny. That's part of who we are. So.
Yes, because it's a natural talent that we have.
Yeah, we're freaking hilarious. And I think we also talked about a silly little show we want to do about how I, Raven, was formerly a sketch artist working for various police departments to help catch notorious serial killers. And I will show my sketches.
I've seen it.
I will show my sketches, and I broke these cases wide open.
Spitting imagery.
Wide open.
Imagery. You got to see it.
Yeah, so that's coming up too.
Oh man, that's funny. Okay, well, we're gonna catch y'all in the next one. I want everybody for subscribing, watching our follow us, email us. I have to figure this out. So if you have anything else, go ahead and say it. I think I'm done. So we will catch y'all in the next one.
Yep. God bless everybody.
All right. Bye.